I woke up to the sound of trumpets. Not the metaphoric kind, not even the jazzy kind, but actual, high-pitched, off-key brass blaring like a high school marching band that lost half its sheet music. My dog was howling, my wife was pacing in her bathrobe muttering about her missed radiology appointment, and when I pulled open the curtains, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. There was a 12-foot inflatable bald eagle doing pelvic thrusts on my driveway. A man in red, white, and blue tights was juggling flaming batons beside it. My garage was barricaded behind 3 porta-potties and a taco truck. My car, my only car, was blocked in. For the 3rd time that week, I whispered the same prayer. Dear Lord, deliver me from my HOA before I deliver myself to a padded room. Our neighborhood's HOA had outdone themselves this time. Welcome to Founders' Day, a made-up holiday invented by Karen Mallory, president of the HOA, queen of ornamental lawn signs, and patron saint of unsolicited citations. This year, she'd organized a full-scale parade. But not just any parade. This was a parade that snaked down residential streets like a drunk python, blocking driveways, trampling flower beds, and launching a full-scale assault on peace and quiet. The kicker? No one had told us it was happening. No mail, no text, not even a passive-aggressive flyer duct-taped to a lamppost. I threw on a hoodie, stepped into flip-flops, and stormed down the driveway. The parade was already underway. A brass band honked by, the drumline deafening. Children tossed handfuls of glitter confetti into the air like they were launching tactical distractions. 2 HOA board members were guiding a float shaped like a giant HOA rulebook with a mechanical gavel swinging back and forth. I'm not making that up. Karen spotted me from her throne, yes, a literal throne, on a float pulled by a golf cart. She wore a sash that said, Madam Founder, and a smug smile that made me want to power wash my eyeballs. I stepped out, dodging a unicyclist dressed as George Washington, and waved her down. She saw me. She absolutely saw me. And then she looked straight ahead and waved like she was Miss America on a moving disaster. By the time I made it to the float, she had already dismounted and was yelling at a vendor about lemonade prices. I tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around, fake smile in place, eyes hiding daggers. Karen, I said, straining to stay civil, you're blocking my driveway. My wife needs to get to her medical appointment. You didn't notify anyone this was happening. What is going on? She blinked like I'd asked her to recite pi. It was in the newsletter, she said, with a tone that suggested I was a feral animal who had failed to read the rules of civilization. Page 3. Lower left corner. We clearly stated the parade would pass through Maple Grove and surrounding streets between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Karen, I replied, that newsletter is a PDF link you emailed once 5 months ago with the subject line, Fun Spring Things. It went to my spam folder. Well, she said, that's not really my problem, is it? That's when my neighbor Rick showed up, barefoot and holding a half-eaten pickle. Rick was the kind of man who mowed his lawn at night, owned 6 drones, and believed every HOA was secretly laundering money through decorative fencing contracts. But he was also a land surveyor, and his brain was sharper than it looked behind those permanently smudged glasses. He took one glance at the chaos, then looked at me and said, You know, a lot of this route runs over private easements, not public roads. I helped map some of this land for the county. Bet they don't have permits. Karen turned on him like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Oh please, Rick. Just because you wander around with a measuring tape doesn't make you an expert. Rick raised his eyebrow. Actually, Karen, I'm licensed by the state, and I have a copy of the property lines in my truck. I'd bet your big parade is trespassing in 6 places. She rolled her eyes and stormed off to yell at the guy inflating a bounce house next to my hydrangeas. Rick turned back to me, chewing thoughtfully. You know, he said, if someone really wanted to mess with her, buying up the easement rights would be a hell of a move. That was the first time the idea struck me. Buying the route. It sounded absurd. But then I looked around, at the mess, the invasion, the sheer arrogance of it all, and something shifted. I wasn't just annoyed. I was done. Back inside, my wife was on hold with her clinic. She saw the look in my eyes and asked, "You're not going to do something stupid, are you?" "No," I said slowly. "I'm going to do something smart. Very, very smart." The rest of the day passed like a fever dream. Loud music, broken sprinklers, neighbors caught in their garages like trapped animals. I watched it all with quiet fury, my lemonade glass sweating in my hand. Karen waved from her float one last time as it turned the corner, her fake royal wave now just salt in the wound. But inside, I was no longer simmering, I was planning. Rick came over that evening with a folder of maps, and I opened my laptop. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others are fought with lawyers, land deeds, and LLCs. And this one? This one was just getting started. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of trumpets or taco trucks, but because the fire of a plan had rooted itself in my brain overnight and refused to let me sleep. The absurdity of what Karen had done still echoed in my head, the complete blockade of my driveway, the parade, the floats, the sash. But what stayed with me most was Rick's casual observation that much of the route wasn't even legally accessible without consent. That parade had paraded itself straight across a minefield of legal boundaries. And if what Rick said was true, that minefield was riddled with opportunities. I made a pot of the strongest coffee in the house and texted Tara. She was my cousin on my mother's side, though you'd never know we were related. Where I was deliberate, Tara was quick. Where I hesitated, she lunged. She worked in zoning enforcement for the county, and more than once had helped me navigate local bureaucracy when Karen tried to cite me for non-conforming mailbox height. The text I sent was simple: "Need you to help me ruin a parade." She replied with 3 fire emojis and "be there in 30. By the time she showed up in jeans, boots, and a messy ponytail, Rick had already pulled up the digital maps on his laptop. We all sat on my back porch with coffee and bagels, looking like we were planning a casual brunch instead of the beginning stages of a parade takedown. Tara scrolled through the maps and clicked her tongue in disbelief. "This is gold," she muttered, zooming in. "See this? Right here. This entire stretch, Maple Grove Lane through Crestview Bend, runs through a private easement technically owned by the old Robinson Trust. And here? That's utility easement, not a public right-of-way. You can't hold events there without permission." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, leaning forward, "you could stop the parade. You just need standing." Rick grinned. "Or ownership." Tara raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you're about to buy an easement." "I'm going to buy all of them," I said, sipping my coffee. "Every last foot of parade path I can legally get my hands on." It started with research. For 2 straight days, we combed through land registries, probate records, and dusty local archives. The Robinson Trust had dissolved after the heirs moved to Arizona, but the property rights had been inherited by a forgotten LLC that was barely active. With a few phone calls, a very motivated real estate lawyer, and some cash from my rainy day fund, I acquired the easement rights on Maple Grove within a week. I didn't buy the land itself, just the right to approve or deny access. The kind of detail most people overlook. Karen had definitely overlooked it. Once the first domino fell, the rest started tipping quickly. Rick contacted an old client of his who held an abandoned drainage access lot near the end of the parade route. I bought that too. Another chunk was owned by a nonprofit that was happy to sell the rights in exchange for a donation. Before long, I owned 3 of the 5 key choke points of the parade route. Karen could reroute it around my driveway, sure, but not around 3 completely separate properties. That's when I knew we were playing chess now, and she was still flinging confetti. Of course, I needed to do it quietly. Karen wasn't stupid, just arrogant. If she got wind of what I was doing, she'd rush to secure permits or fake permissions. So every acquisition went through different LLCs with obscure names. I used contacts from my years in IT to file paperwork discreetly and divert attention. One LLC was called Springview Holdings. Another was Marshland Access Corporation. Nothing that would ever tie back to me unless someone did deep, forensic digging, and I knew for a fact the HOA couldn't handle anything deeper than a social media post. But then Karen made her move. A week into my quiet acquisitions, I received a letter. Not in the mail. Hand-delivered. It was an HOA violation. Apparently, the potted succulents on my porch were non-compliant with community color guidelines. She also cited me for visual clutter, lawn inconsistency, and inappropriate birdbath height. The letter ended with a handwritten note that said, "You've been warned. We're watching." No signature. Just a heart drawn with 3 exclamation marks. The level of pettiness was almost impressive. I scanned the letter and sent it to Tara and Rick in our group chat. Tara replied with, "She's spooked. Good. Keep pushing." Rick responded with a photo of a wrecked parade float from the internet and the caption, "Foreshadowing." Still, I had to escalate carefully. My goal wasn't just revenge, it was to make sure it stuck. So I started preparing a legal wall she couldn't climb. With my lawyer, we crafted cease and desist notices that would be triggered the moment a permit was filed without our consent. I got statements notarized from my LLCs declaring that no public access would be granted through the parcels on parade day. I registered private security under a separate firm for future enforcement. At night, I'd sit on my porch and listen to the silence that had returned to the neighborhood. It was almost peaceful again, until I remembered how easily it had been hijacked for one woman's personal celebration. That's when I'd open another document, plot another step, and quietly smile to myself. I didn't tell my wife everything, just enough. She thought I was getting a little obsessed, but when I reminded her how Karen had blocked her from getting to her scan, she softened. "Just don't get arrested," she said, brushing my cheek. Or worse, invited to the next HOA meeting. By the end of week 2, I had it all. The final easement came from a man named Donnie who lived in a retirement community 2 towns over. He owned the narrow strip that connected the starting point of the parade to the main road. I offered him above market rate for the rights and threw in lifetime lawn care. Donnie didn't even ask why. He just said, "Anything to stick it to these HOA types." I had won once, banned my wind chimes. With every new signature, I felt something I hadn't in months: control. Not over others, but over my own space, my peace, my dignity. Karen had paraded over all of that, and now I was building the roadblock to make sure it never happened again. I had one final move left before I went public with my plans. Something bold, symbolic, and undeniable. I called a local sign company and ordered 3 custom road signs. Not standard ones. Big, bold, and dramatic. The kind they use for movie set. Each one said the same thing. Private access, parade route closed, owner consent required. And beneath that, in slightly smaller font, mid-March shutdown enforced. Mid-March arrived like a lion in a glitter hat. It was parade day. I'd been preparing for this moment for nearly a month, and the quiet buzz of anticipation hummed in my chest like electricity. From my porch, I could already hear the distant chaos stirring, children's voices squealing, tuba players warming up, wheels creaking on cart floats decorated with overdone bunting. My neighborhood, once a calm street with occasional joggers and dog walkers, now looked like it was hosting the county fair. The inflatable bald eagle had returned, this time wearing sunglasses. Karen was back too, naturally, floating through the crowd like royalty inspecting her kingdom. But this time, I wasn't pacing or panicking. I sat in a lawn chair, sipping lemonade, dressed in my favorite hoodie, eyes locked on the street like a general surveying the battlefield. The parade kicked off with predictable pageantry. Karen, in a new sash that read HOA Founder of the Century, led the way on her golf cart throne, flanked by 2 HOA enforcers with clipboards and plastic walkie-talkies. Behind her came the marching band, instruments shining in the sun, followed by a chaotic gaggle of themed floats. One featured a spinning mock-up of the HOA newsletter, another had papier-mâché versions of the HOA board members' heads bobbing on oversized puppets. I had to admit it was visually creative, if you could ignore the legality of its route. But that was about to become unavoidable. As the floats inched down Maple Grove and neared the first choke point, the stretch of road now owned by one of my shell LLCs, I sent a silent nod to Rick, who was stationed 2 blocks down with a walkie-talkie and a donut in hand. He gave a thumbs up. Tara, stationed near the end of the route with a team of off-duty security agents in neon vests, checked in via text. All clear. Then came the moment. The first float approached the barricade. I had installed collapsible crowd barriers at the edge of the easement and posted a sign tall enough to be seen from a block away. Private property, no access without consent. The parade paused. Karen, noticing the disruption, climbed off her cart and strutted toward the front like a general heading into war. Her heels clacked sharply on the pavement, her voice slicing through the noise. "Who put this here?" she barked. "This isn't on the route map." The security officer on site calmly handed her a document. She took it, eyes scanning with confusion that quickly morphed into anger. She looked up at the barrier, then at the sign, then at the officer again. "This has to be a mistake," she insisted. "This parade was approved by the HOA." The officer nodded patiently. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure it was. But this section of the route runs over private easements. The owner has not granted access. This event is now in violation of Municipal Ordinance 14B, subsection 9. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She whipped out her phone and began dialing furiously while the parade behind her stalled into awkward silence. The band stopped mid-song, the baton twirlers stood confused, and parents began glancing around, wondering why their kids weren't moving forward anymore. A few vendors started backing up, unsure if they were about to get fined or filmed. She paced in front of the barrier for a full minute, gesturing wildly, her phone pressed to her ear. Eventually, she turned to the crowd and shouted, "We are experiencing a brief pause due to some paperwork confusion. Please stay where you are, we'll be continuing shortly." But there was no shortly. Because 2 blocks ahead the same signs were up again. Same barriers. Same security. And 2 blocks past that? Yet another checkpoint. It wasn't one road that was blocked. It was the whole route. I had bought it all. Not the land, but the right of passage. The route she had boasted about in newsletters and bragged about at HOA meetings was now legally locked up tighter than Fort Knox, and she couldn't do a thing without my signature. Then the news van arrived. Oh, that was Rick's idea. He'd tipped off a local outlet the night before, feeding them a story about a homeowner standing up to an overreaching HOA's parade madness. They loved it. The reporter was already on site with a mic in hand, asking Karen pointed questions while trying to capture the growing crowd's confusion and frustration. And Karen? She cracked right there, on camera. "This is sabotage," she screamed, her hair slightly frazzled, her lipstick slightly smudged. "This man, this bitter, petty man, is trying to ruin a community event out of spite." The reporter, barely containing his smirk, asked, "Are you saying you did not secure full permission to use this route for your event?" Karen's eyes darted. "It was assumed. We've used it for years. But you didn't file permits this year?" "There wasn't time. We didn't think we needed to." Behind her, the float shaped like a gavel deflated with a comedic wheeze. I finally stood and walked down the driveway. Cameras turned. People looked up. Even Karen paused mid-sentence. I didn't speak right away. I just handed her a crisp folder with notarized documents, stamped and sealed. In bold letters across the top, "Denial of access, easement 4C and 4D. She glanced through them, mouth twitching. Then I leaned slightly toward the reporter and said, "This isn't a parade. It's a trespassing convention." The crowd broke into a mix of gasps and laughter. Even some parents chuckled. Karen stood frozen. I turned and walked back to my house, leaving her to try and salvage the disaster unraveling in front of her. But there was no salvaging it. The band started packing up. Floats turned around. Vendors wheeled their carts away. And the HOA? They scrambled, flailing like a half-sunk ship trying to plug holes in a storm. The parade was over. I sat back on my porch and watched it all unfold with eerie calm. Not a single raised voice from me. No yelling. No lawsuit. Just property law and preparation. And as Karen passed my house for the final time, no longer waving but steaming, she looked up and saw the sign I'd mounted on my front yard just for today. It read, in clean white letters, Mid-March Shutdown. Brought to you by the people who actually read property laws. She didn't wave back. By the next morning, my neighborhood was practically humming with whispers, memes, and the lingering scent of stale cotton candy. Someone had uploaded a video of Karen's outburst to social media. Multiple angles, high resolution, with captions like HOA Karen vs. Property Law and Parade Gets Owned Mid-March. It took less than 12 hours for it to go viral. Within a day, #Mid-March Shutdown was trending, and people from other states were sharing their own HOA horror stories in the comments. Karen, once the self-declared community darling, had been digitally immortalized in the worst way possible, arguing with a security guard, flailing at legal documents, and throwing a tantrum in full view of a local news station. The HOA emergency meeting happened that evening in the community clubhouse. I didn't go, of course, but Rick did. He showed up wearing a shirt with a cartoon eagle being deflated and the words, "Know your easements," underneath. He live-texted me updates with the enthusiasm of a court reporter during a celebrity trial. According to Rick, the mood was pure chaos. Karen tried to reclaim control with her usual mix of condescension and faux positivity, but the crowd wasn't having it. Questions were shouted from every corner of the room, about permits, about money spent, about legal liability. One elderly couple even demanded to know why their grandkids were crying in the back seat of their SUV for 2 hours during the standstill. Apparently, Karen tried to spin it. She blamed me, the security team, the uncooperative property owners, anyone but herself. But then Tara showed up. I hadn't asked her to, but of course she couldn't resist. She stepped in wearing her zoning badge and calmly explained, to the entire room, that Karen had never obtained proper authorization for the parade, had not submitted a permit to the city, and had exposed the HOA to liability by crossing over easements without consent. That's when things really fell apart. One board member openly accused Karen of misappropriating HOA funds to pay for the parade decorations, which turned out to have been ordered from a luxury party supplier. Another demanded to see bank records. And a third, a mild-mannered guy named Carl who usually just brought donuts, said flat out that Karen had embarrassed this neighborhood more than any viral dog attack or lawn flamingo incident in history. The gloves were off. By the end of the meeting, Karen was stripped of her parade privileges, voted out as event coordinator, and warned that her position as HOA president would be under review pending further investigation. When Rick texted me, "They're forming a Karen committee," I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on my shirt. Of course, Karen didn't go quietly. The next day, I found a letter duct-taped to my mailbox. It was a sloppy attempt at a legal threat, accusing me of harassment, neighborhood sabotage, and creating a hostile atmosphere. I took a photo of it, framed it, and hung it in my garage under a plaque that said, "Trophy from the 2025 HOA Games." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The law had already done the talking, and now the internet was adding its own colorful commentary. It didn't stop there. A well-known YouTube legal analyst picked up the story and made a 30-minute breakdown video titled, "How This Man Shut Down a Parade Using Property Law, and Why It Was Totally Legal." He went through every deed I'd purchased, every statute I'd used, and called it one of the cleanest examples of tactical petty revenge in recent suburban history. That video alone got over 2 million views. I didn't care about the fame, But I did enjoy watching the comments section light up with people rooting for me like I was a character in a courtroom drama. Then came the lawsuit attempt. Karen, backed by the remaining loyalists in the HOA, filed a complaint against me claiming I had conspired to disrupt civic engagement. My lawyer, who by now was practically high-fiving me every time we talked, responded with a motion to dismiss and a stack of counterclaims. Within a week, her complaint was thrown out. The judge didn't even blink. In fact, he reportedly snorted when he saw the attached video clip. I filed a small claims suit in return for property damage to my driveway, which occurred when a float backed over my retaining wall. The HOA settled quietly for $3,500 and issued a public apology in the next newsletter. That newsletter was a masterpiece. Clearly written by someone other than Karen, it included a section titled, "Moving Forward with Respect," and featured a bulleted list of new policies. Among them was the requirement for unanimous consent from affected property owners before any event could take place within the community. It was unofficially dubbed the Karen Clause. It even had a little footnote, inspired by the events of the mid-March shutdown. The neighborhood began to change in subtle ways. People who used to whisper about the HOA's grip now chatted openly at the mailbox. More homeowners showed up to board meetings. Decorations became more personal and less approved catalog. Someone even painted a mural on their garage door with a giant eagle saluting and the words, "Freedom from Founders Day." I hadn't expected a revolution. I just wanted to reclaim my driveway. But it turned out a little lawful defiance could go a long way. As for Karen, she withdrew. No more float parades. No more newsletter speeches. She still lived in the corner house, but her yard decorations vanished, and her social media went silent. Rumor had it she was facing a quiet audit of the HOA's last 3 years of expenses. I wasn't gloating. Okay, maybe a little. But mostly I was relieved. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever had a bake sale shut down, a tree trimmed without permission, or a mailbox cited for being too enthusiastic in color. One evening, a young couple from 3 streets over knocked on my door. They introduced themselves and handed me a homemade pie. "We just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, "for what you did. We used to feel trapped in this place. You reminded us we're allowed to push back." I didn't know what to say. I took the pie and nodded, feeling a weird, unexpected warmth in my chest. Not the smug kind. The kind that comes when you realize you did something that mattered to people who never got to speak up. That night, I sat on my porch with Rick and Tara. We didn't talk much. Just watched the street, quiet again, peaceful. No trumpets. No inflatables. Just the sound of sprinklers clicking on and a few porch lights blinking in the distance. Rick raised a beer. "To the next parade," he said with a grin. I raised my glass. "Only if I'm throwing it." A year later, almost to the day, I found myself pacing my front yard again, but this time for an entirely different reason. There were tents being set up, flags being strung between lampposts, and speakers being wired to poles that had never known anything louder than a neighbor's birthday playlist. It was the first annual Freedom March, and I was the proud and slightly nervous host. It wasn't about sticking it to Karen anymore. This time, the event was about giving the neighborhood a voice that wasn't filtered through threats of fines or passive-aggressive lawn notices. It was about celebration, community, and maybe a little bit of extremely well-earned gloating. Just a little. We didn't go over the top. There were no floats shaped like oversized legal document. No marching bands trying to play Sousa while stepping on flowerbed. Instead, we had food trucks, real ones that parked where they were supposed to. We had a petting zoo featuring 2 goats, a sleepy alpaca, and a rabbit that somehow ended up being the crowd favorite. Rick brought a giant chalkboard where people could write their least favorite HOA rule and most satisfying neighborhood moment. My favorite entry was a kid's scribbled message. "Thank you for making parades safe for cars." I didn't even realize how deep this thing had sunk into the neighborhood's bones until then. Tara, of course, was in charge of logistics. She even managed to get the city council to officially recognize the Freedom March as a local event, not just a protest-turned-party. We had permits, safety signs, portable bathrooms, the whole setup. Everything was clean, efficient, and most importantly, fully legal. Which meant that the moment Karen peeked out her blinds and saw the crowd gathering, she had no grounds to stop it. She watched from her window, phone in hand, eyes scanning the street as if looking for something, anything, to report. But this time, the law was on our side. Completely. Ironclad. I caught her standing in her yard later that afternoon, arms folded, wearing sunglasses and a tight-lipped expression that would have frightened a marble statue. She didn't come over. She didn't wave. But she watched as dozens of families walked past her lawn smiling, laughing, and shaking hands. She watched as kids decorated scooters with streamers and rode alongside a group of veterans who had joined us to walk the block in honor of real civic service. When Rick strolled by in a white bathrobe and slippers, holding a sign that said, "Mid-March. Never forget," I thought I saw her jaw clench so hard it might snap. Despite all of it, I didn't hate her. Not anymore. I just wanted her to see what it looked like when people weren't pushed around. Maybe that was enough. Later in the evening, after the sun had dipped behind the rooftops and the speakers had quieted down, I stood by the grill flipping burgers while neighbors gathered around folding tables. A few people made little speeches. Nothing formal, just off-the-cuff words of appreciation, a toast or two. A young mom said her kids finally felt like they could decorate for holidays again. An older couple thanked everyone for turning the street into something joyful. People shared stories of ridiculous HOA fines they'd endured over the years, and each one got more absurd than the last. Someone had once been cited for leaving their garden hose insufficiently coiled. Another was fined for having a flag that clashed with mailbox aesthetics. Laughter rolled over us like a wave. And not a single person missed the old days. Then someone handed me the mic. I wasn't planning on giving a speech, but the moment was too good to pass up. I cleared my throat and looked around at the crowd. I'm not much of a speaker, I started, which got a few laughs since they knew I was the one who had orchestrated the parade takedown like a general plotting a siege. A year ago, I was stuck in my own driveway. I was angry, frustrated, and a little out of my mind. But what came out of that wasn't just revenge. It was a wake-up call, for me, and maybe for all of us. We stopped pretending this place belonged to one loud voice, and we remembered it belongs to all of us. That's why today isn't just a party. It's a reminder that we get a say, that rules are supposed to serve people, not silence them, and that parades should never block the people they're meant to include. There was a round of applause. Not thunderous, but real, sincere. It felt better than any court ruling or viral meme ever could. Just as I stepped down, a man I didn't recognize approached me with a smile and a business card. He introduced himself as the director of a national homeowners' rights group. Apparently, the story had reached them through a mutual contact, and they'd been following it closely. He told me that they were launching a new campaign against predatory HOA enforcement, and they wanted someone to represent the grassroots homeowner perspective. I thought it was a prank at first, but the card was real. The offer was real. He asked if I'd be willing to join their board as an advisor. I said I'd think about it. That night, after everyone had gone home and the cleanup had mostly finished, I stood in the street looking around at what we'd built. Rick was passed out in a lawn chair holding a hot dog like it was a trophy. Tara was still shouting at a teen about recycling rules, which felt like cosmic balance being restored. A few lanterns floated above us, casting a soft golden hue across the pavement. The Freedom March had ended, but something bigger had taken root. As I turned toward the house, I saw a small envelope taped to my front door. No name. No return address. Inside was a single note, written in neat, careful handwriting. It said, "We may never agree. But you made me think. K." I folded the note and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Maybe she'd learned something after all. Or maybe it was just a flicker of self-awareness caught in the twilight of her control. Either way, I could live with it, because in the end, I didn't just shut down a parade. I reopened something much more important: our right to peace, to voice, and to laugh at inflatable eagles without losing our driveways. And for once, the streets of our neighborhood finally felt like they belonged to the people again.